Alrighty, y'all, how you going? We're looking at some interesting geographical quirks, kind of based around maps of Australia. Now, you know I love doing these, and we've done them before. They usually do really well. It's just a fascinating country when you break down some interesting quirks and facts and borders and all these kinds of things. So let's dive into this. This is from a channel called Ticket to Know. Be linked in the description down below so you can check out this whole video and, of course, browse our channel. Let's take a look at this. I have a feeling this is going to be interesting, as these usually are.
Some geographical quirks of Australia that you might not already know. These are the Australian states and territories.
And again, we've always said this. It's so interesting to see when you see it kind of blown up in a big picture, right? The whole country, of course, it's huge. And then as someone who, lives in a country of 50 states, as you can see in the map behind me, above my finger there, yeah, 50 states. There's still some really big ones, but nowhere near as big as this. I mean, these states are just ridiculous, right? They're so big. If you're driving across South Australia, I mean, you could start down here, and look how long it would take you to go over here. And then you look at crazy behemoths, like Queensland is humongous. Western Australia is just, unbelievable. I can't even comprehend how big it is.
Here's Tasmania, the only island state, ringed by ocean and cut off from the rest of the continent by the Bass Strait. Except it's not quite. If we zoom in, we can see that Tasmania and its northern neighbour state Victoria actually share a land border on this tiny and uninhabited island. The maritime border between the two states cuts right across Boundary Islet.
Victoria and Tasmania actually share a border on land. Now, in all my research and education about Australia in the last couple of years, I have never heard that. How many people actually knew that watching this? Did you know that they share a border? That is pretty bizarre. I mean, granted, it's a little tiny micro island here, or whatever that's called, but geez, that is wild.
This little islet border anomaly arose as the result of surveying errors and misinterpretations when repeatedly carving off sections of the colony of New South Wales into what are today Tasmania and Victoria.
Wow.
Boundary Islet is basically a chunk of rock that sometimes has some seals lounging on it.
So it's not a typical, border that you would see every day on a drive to work. No.
Speaking
but
of
still,
disjointed borders, the Australian Capital Territory, or ACT.
Yeah, this one I really don't know about. It's one of the least explored parts of Australia for me, right? I still have to do a lot more research on the ACT. It is bizarre from my perspective, just seeing these humongous states, and then, of course, states and territories. And then, of course, ACT is really small, and it's tucked, of course, within New South Wales.
It was carved out of New South Wales so the federal government could have a territory of its own from which to govern. But they felt strongly about the federal government also having access to a seaport. So instead of making the ACT somewhere on the coast, they just annexed another small territory, the southern peninsula of Jervis Bay.
Yes.
Jervis Bay is a separate territory from the ACT. But when it comes to federal elections, the people of Jervis Bay vote in the electorate of Fenner, which is centred in the ACT.
Oh. Yes, this is one I always forget about, but I have heard or learned about multiple times. That yes, even over here, Jervis Bay is technically more with ACT than it is New South Wales.
And in terms of geographical quirks of electorates, spare a thought for the people of Norfolk Island, who vote in the ACT electorate of B, 1,900 kilometres away.
Jeez.
But that isn't...
I had no idea Norfolk Island was that far. Whoa.
Even the furthest removed local representation in the country. The electorate of Lingiari encompasses the red centre of Australia, the tropical top end of the Northern Territory, minus the urban areas of Darwin and some of Palmerston, and Christmas Island.
And Christmas Island is way up there. Wow, why did I forget that these are so far away? Christmas Island is way up there. Christmas Island looks like it's definitely closer to, I believe this is what, Indonesia? Closer to Indonesia than it is to Australia.
Which is 2,500 kilometres away. And there are some even more widely distributed pockets of Lingiari. Maybe it needs a video of its own. While we're on the topic of the outback, Australia is home to some really large pieces of land that are used for cattle stations. The largest is Anna Creek Station.
Now that I have
which
a
is the
video
largest cattle station in the world. It's over 23,000 square kilometers, which is a larger land area than 50 of the world's countries. And it's also true that the country of Brunei used to own a station in Australia that had a larger land area than Brunei itself, although it sold the station in 2018.
Oh, wow.
Back to the state borders now. And while Australian Aboriginal people have of course been living on the land with their own boundaries for tens of thousands of years, when white colonists tried to divide it up, the results were imperfect. Here's the border of Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia. Looks like it should be a pretty neat line, right? If we zoom in, we can see that the borders are actually a bit of a mess. Victoria juts out to the northwest. The river boundary moves from being along the southern bank to being in the middle of the river. The intersection of the three states is in the middle of the river.
Oh, wow.
So why isn't this just a nice line?
Yeah.
The 141st meridian was originally surveyed to be the eastern border of South Australia. However, it was incorrectly placed about 3.5 kilometers west of where it actually lies. When the mistake was discovered, New South Wales decided it was fair enough and established the accurate meridian as the border. Victoria kind of went, yeah, no, we like the border where it is.
Oh,
leaving
wow.
us with this mess today. And Australia has another line that looks straight, but it's actually not. The borders of the Northern Territory, South Australia, and Western Australia.
Yeah.
This north-south line cutting across the entire
That's totally
continent
straight.
looks dead straight.
Yeah.
But if we zoom in, we can again see there's a tiny perturbation. This
Oh my
deviation is
God.
only 127 meters long, and was of course the result of another surveying error 100 years ago.
Yeah, there are a couple of these. I'll have to show some other time. There are a couple of these in the U.S. that most, like 98% of Americans don't even get or would know about. So yeah, that one is really funny. I would have totally thought it was a straight line. I always have thought it was a straight line, a nice clean border, but it has a little notch in it. Wow.
The border was intended to be approximately on the 129th meridian. So instead of measuring from one end of the continent to the other, 2 points were picked at either end that were pretty close to the meridian, and a north-south line was drawn from each point. Except, of course, the points were not exactly on the meridian, so the north-south lines didn't match up. Instead of fixing it, they just drew an east-west line to join the two north-south lines up.
Wow.
Could they have fixed it? For sure. But they had actually already agreed not to worry too much about little slip-ups like this. They'd agreed that an academic result was not to be sought after with a high and fanciful degree of accuracy. A century-old way of saying, she'll be right. And just a couple for my fellow Victorians who, like me, thought they had a good mental map of Australia in their head, but maybe I don't. Adelaide is north of Canberra, and Perth is north of Sydney. These realizations actually...
Okay, that I didn't know either. I've seen facts or, map, quirks like that in the U.S., especially those ones where you hear like, oh, so-and-so city is, more north of this city. And you're like, wait, what? Yeah, so like I know like a really funny one is, Los Angeles, which is, Southern California on the coast, right, is not as far west as like, what is it? Like Reno, Nevada, I think, or something. And you're like, what the hell? Like, how is somewhere in Nevada, like, further west than, Los Angeles? It's on the freaking ocean. But that's because, like, the U.S. goes at such a, let's see, I'm looking in my camera here. It goes at such an angle when it goes up, right? It keeps going more west. So you have, like, Idaho and Nevada are, like, really far west. Whereas California, at least parts of it, or Arizona or whatever, like, aren't as far west as you think compared to some of the northern parts. Or like Texas is so big, like El Paso, Texas, right, where we've literally lived around that area. El Paso, Texas is so far west that it's literally closer. That part of West Texas is closer to Los Angeles on the coast than it is to Houston, Texas, which is literally in Texas. Houston's on, of course, the Gulf of Mexico coast. So yeah, little factoids like that are interesting. And these Australian ones, I did not realize that Adelaide would have been north of Canberra. That is weird.
Perth is north of Sydney.
And Perth is north of Sydney. Again, in my head, I thought Sydney was like up here, maybe. And Perth was like, down here. So it's just like how you think of things sometimes it is not actually the correct, orientation.
These realizations actually blew my mind.
All right, and looking at a couple maps to end the video, I mean, look at this as the breakdown, like the timeline, right, of the map of Australia. Look at 1788. All you have is New South Wales. Even Tasmania is part of it. But then as you fast forward, I mean, look at 1825. It was just New South Wales and Western Australia with Tasmania actually colored in, so that must have been its own thing. I mean, they're still way huge, but good thing they kind of, divided them up a little more, right? Although Western Australia was pretty much untouched. That's what I find interesting. It's always been, Western Australia has always been this huge. Alrighty, and look at this map. This is the world life expectancy as of last year, 2022. Now, some interesting things. Look at the top 10, right? We have Japan at the highest, Singapore, Switzerland. Japan at the highest doesn't surprise me. I've always heard they have amazing life expectancy there. A lot of people are really healthy. They just live a long time. So that's not a big surprise, but it's still very impressive. And then, like Singapore, Switzerland, Italy, very impressive at 4th. And look at this, Australia coming up at 5th. With 83.3 years average. And then Spain, Canada, South Korea, Iceland, and Sweden rounding off the top 10. Now, that's very, very interesting. On the flip side, it is scary. Some of these countries I won't put on blast because they're the least expectant. That's not a list you want to be on. But some of them are really low. I mean, in this day and age, 54, 55, in your 50s, that is pretty scary. That is the average life expectancy. But if we zoom back out to the whole world map, one thing that stands out, like Canada for the Americas, the closest to me, no surprise, Canada is more. They have it going on with the life expectancy. Kind of really disappointed, if I'm being honest, in the U.S. I mean, look at us. We are the light blue. Looks like we're about this shade, so 75 to 77. Does that look right? I think we're that shade. So 75 to 77 years as a whole. That's not great, honestly. That's not great at all. I mean, geez, for a country that, is supposed to be really good at a lot of stuff, right? And of course, everyone knows how expensive healthcare is here. It's just like so annoying, right? It's so scary how expensive it is. And apparently it doesn't pay off as well because the average life expectancy is not impressive. We're nowhere near the highest here. We're nowhere near Australia, for example. And we all know how much the healthcare costs in Australia, how extremely little it is compared to how expensive it is here. Also, just the fact that, there are sources at least here in America that say, this is some of the best healthcare in the world. Well, it's when you see stats like this, it's kind of like it makes you doubt that, right? It's kind of freaky. It's like, well, why doesn't this prove itself on stats then? So that one's really frustrating. I have to admit, I'm very disappointed in our country there for that life expectancy. It should be a lot higher than that. But of course, it comes down to more than just healthcare. Of course, it's there's a lot of people, lots of different walks of life. And people have to make choices to take care of themselves, right? And there's a lot of, bad diets here. Not exercise enough, might not diet enough, you name it. And unfortunately, it just, we don't score well on this map. So that's pretty tragic, honestly. We need to get that life expectancy way up here, I think. But other than that, I mean, lots of Europe really has their stuff together as well when it comes to the life expectancy. So shout out to like Switzerland and Italy and Spain and Sweden and so forth. I mean, wow. And also, not to spark a rivalry or a fight or anything, but I'm actually surprised New Zealand's is slightly less than Australia's. I thought they would have been honestly the same. So that is interesting as well. I wonder if there's any contributing factors to that. Now, this one is really crazy. Again, Australia coming in like an all-star, honestly, on this map. Like, holy smokes, actually blowing the whole world away right now. This is the percentage of adults that have at least $100,000 in wealth. Now, it does include non-financial assets like housing and land. So if I'm interpreting that right, it doesn't mean necessarily like, everyone has $100,000 in their like checking account. But still, I mean, doing well, let's say. And again, U.S. coming in right about mid-range, barely above mid-range. Canada doing better than us. And other than that, I mean, not a lot of countries were even polled for this, but I mean, just a kind of mixed bag everywhere. And then you have Australia in dark blue, which means they're way up here, which basically means just over 70% of people are doing really, really well in Australia. It's just like, bravo. Like, round of applause, like, holy smokes. You guys are doing something right down there, man. The sad truth here is America is always touted as, like, the richest country on earth. And, I'm not going to go into it. I don't even know the facts. Honestly, I'm just a guy here. But, yeah, I'm sure that might be true or near true in certain ways. But it's definitely not true in a way of, like, it doesn't mean, all Americans are rich. That's certainly not true. And I know pretty much everyone watching this knows that. But let me just reiterate, that is not the truth. It is like crazy times here, how expensive it is, and inflation and wages haven't caught up and stuff. A lot of people are in a crazy, financial crisis right now. It's a weird time in our country. And here it is to build off that last map. You heard me say the U.S. is rich. It's just not that every person here is rich, because that's certainly not the case. This supports my cause here. Yes. This is a map of the world billionaires by country and origin. And, basically the colors mean like red is inherited, the inherited billions. Green means, company founders, right? And then the rest is basically, executive, or the yellow means like financial sector, right? The point is, everywhere else, you're looking at a percentage point or a few. And then you have America, which is 30%. So like 30%, if I'm reading this right, like a third of the people who are billionaires on earth are from the U.S. or are in the U.S. or whatever. So that is, sounds about right? That's what the U.S. likes to flex. Unfortunately, that doesn't really matter to most people here. And Australia, people are doing really well. The average person, should be generally doing pretty well, whereas they only have 1.8% of the world's billionaires. So absolutely like minuscule compared to the U.S. You see, like, basically what this means is there's an unbelievably humongous wealth disparity here in the U.S. That's pretty alarming. And finally, our last map here, we have good political maps of Oceania are hard to come by. I mean, look at these two maps. I have to agree. You never see maps that are like really focused down here. And to see it broken down in this really cool way is awesome, because usually maps are so generic, and this is all just ocean, and it acts like none of these places exist. And you basically see Australia and Indonesia and Papua New Guinea and stuff. You don't really see anything else. I mean, New Zealand's even a coin toss. Like some maps, New Zealand's not even there. But certainly all these smaller island nations and stuff is not there either. So yeah, taking a closer look, I mean, look at this. A lot of these, it's crazy, because a lot of them I just have kind of like never heard of or just don't remember a lot, because they're hard to find. Like, they're not really shown to you a lot on maps. So like Micronesia, of course, is up here, Palau, Northern Mariana Islands, Guam. Guam is interesting because that's a U.S. territory. And of course, we have the state of Hawaii over here. But yeah, Guam is crazy, because one time when we were on a road trip, we were in, I kid you not, I think we were had just crossed into Oklahoma through Missouri. And we were in Oklahoma in the middle of the U.S. mainland. And we saw a Dodge Ram, pickup truck with a Guam license plate. Looked just like a U.S. plate. I mean, it is a U.S. plate, right? Same system, same, sort of vehicles. And it was just crazy to see a Guam license plate on a pickup truck all the way over here in, Oklahoma or whatever. So that was pretty crazy. Look at this, like Kiribati, Nauru, Solomon Islands. Look at all these places, right? Fiji. This is so cool to see actually broken down. And this area of the world is just so interesting. And a lot of people just, they don't really know a lot about this area unless you live there, right? I mean, Australians probably know a lot about this area. This is their area. But a lot of people, maybe in like the Northern Hemisphere, they just don't really pay attention to this area. It's really fascinating to me. Anywho, that's going to do it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I always enjoy these awesome map videos and geography quirks and stuff. So, yeah, look for more of these to come. As always, I love doing them. I hope to see you down in the comments. Throw a like on there if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to be part of this amazing community we do have here. That's about it for this one, y'all. My name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker, and until next time, I'll catch you later.